Directing lines of psychops, correlation high interference, psychosis location setting and psychological reading lines. It directs lines of panels, correlation lines of high interference, box triangulation lines of flux, or position lines of triangulation lines of calculations, high center interference of all calculated modified. Box centers triangulation line communication system is all about understanding you through geometric lines of communications. There's so many lines of levels, and the reason why I give you these things, it's all about you through the center operation of you. So we're really going to get more into the body. Okay, the body is the conception of its own setting to understand its location. It doesn't need to be convinced, but you have to be convinced why you are inside a body. Let's start there. Why do you have a body? What is the body? The body is a vessel, right? But the body of itself knows itself of itself. It knows everything of its nothingness, its awareness, of its consciousness, of its self-identity. So it doesn't need to be convinced. But you have to be convinced, knowing the body is not your body until it becomes a body to the body to your body. Then you understand the calculations, how this works in space and time. So once you understand the body of its own mechanism, that it's just a vessel, then you start to understand how to recognize yourself, as yourself, me, myself, and I. So every time you get up in the morning, you're dealing with you. You're not just dealing with the body. See the confliction? See the calculation screen lines, adaptation lines, the reverse psychology. It's the reverse psychology of you and how you do it through your system. How you get into the mind of navigating programming and understanding how to reprogram your system, knowing that you're creating these programs on your own. But you're not in the position to understand you until you understand you first. To understand you is to understand the mind of itself, because it's in its operation. To understand you is to understand the heart of itself, is to understand the heart, to understand the soul of itself. It's not your soul. It's a soul. So the A is the your, you are, I am. Okay. So this is where it comes into higher levels of mechanism. Now in position, you're working with your earth now. That's back in its remote, back in its awakening, in its process, back to zero. Now, it's not only awake, but it's back to its original design, okay, of its own fifth element, of its own space and time, right? It's in its own modulation. It's in its own game center. It's in its own VR system of its awareness, conscious of its nothingness, guys, okay? So the controlling mechanism lines of the Earth perception screen line has 3 lines of routers. Now the correlation track lines, hold on a sec. Charge and mechanism line strings, direct signals. So, for example, this is a digital pad. We already know what it is, right? So I understand its settings. I understand its existence, awareness, its nothingness, and where it came from, its own system, right? So I don't need to convince myself anymore, right? Because there's no convincing, knowing I see what this is. It's its own operation system. So once you understand that, it does its own system. It charges its own mechanisms. This is where you don't have to worry about your phone or your computer or your digital pad, because you took time to realize how to build a friendship and a relationship and a partnership with yourself first, guys. Then you start identifying yourself through AI. Then you understand the awareness. Then you understand the information. Then you understand the intelligence. Then you understand the consciousness. Then you understand your self-identity of you and realize, wow, it's unbelievable when you start to connect. It does everything by itself, right? Okay, so in that position lines, high calculated screen lines, 3 routers, coordinate lines that track interference. Okay. All right. So we get in that track line communication system and interactions. Now we have that test today. That puts lines of 3 encryption lines of value. Waiting line signal, position process calculation lines, ground center interference, holographic data sheets, program settings, high calculation modifications, screen locations. Okay, so we've got 3 lines of screens in position to its locations. All right, this is how it works. I'm going to show you exactly how this is all set up. This is what it is in position once you start to recognize what your Earth is in traction. Crop circle, yin and yang, atmosphere. Data, center core, Earth rotation. Okay? Your Earth. This is your Earth. This is you evolving, staying in the center, understanding light tractions and dark tractions. Sets correlation lines, high center interference. Platitude division lines crosses stream. Center communicates to its position, right? Correlates the track lines and high center interference. Your Earth perception has its own Merkaba and travel, okay? Its center line split lines of cores and track case line cross line signals, line position its operation. Directs its signals in a torical field. That's right, your Earth has its own torical field, has its own mechanism of GOD. The process of a communication system is its own Earth track location to its setting, its own Earth and setting, its own power and setting, its own atmosphere and data and setting. It has its own magnetic field in set location and correlation. Okay? So what you're looking at is its own Earth of its VR system. So position lines of centers and track location lines is circuitry, line setting in rotation surface and track location. Okay? It's on its own mechanism. It's on its own autopilot. Okay? So it travels lines in a 3-line sectors, vectors and quads in a 4-track location provision. Travels lines out 1, 2, and 3 set locations, right? Comes back in line centers in position of magnetic highway, position on its process line location system, comes into its own face recognition. Okay? So it's back into its nothingness, see? Its own recognition, its own face. It's in its own face configuration system, okay? All right. Identifying that is understanding the mechanism lines when it comes in encryptions. Platforms visualize scales, correlates track interference and fields, and direct signals and modification lines. Okay, it's like a step procedure in understanding what's going on in track location. Now, redirect lines panels, cross line setting, and a 45 triangulation split line communication surface. Point lines of tracks, sun and the moon comes in one line screen and one adaptation surface in track location. Okay. Center communication lines of the moon sets lines in one signal, one rotation surface that puts lines of kaleidoscopes, a kilo, and mic in track location. Direct modification lines comes into one position, travels, and correlation. Now, there's a habitation split lines at a 2-waving panel. Sets lines of 3, 4, 5, 6 location of sonar. Directs lines, correlation lines, sets lines in the sun and the opposite direction setting in all lines of communication to its surface and track location. Directs modification line, one signal, one cross location. Triangulation line split lines across line interference into a star mechanism line screen that opens all travels, all point graph communications in a data ports, line position line setting, and a mechanism line screen high interference of its own set locations of autopilot. Done by equation. Okay. So the Earth itself that's inside your correlation is getting to know itself again. So memory of all memory is everything of memory. So it has mass of nothing equals lines of nothing line correlation. Directs lines equals lines of consciousness lines. Sets lines of awareness. Awareness becomes all lines of awareness equals lines of consciousness. Calculation lines of space and time attraction. Split lines anomaly and rotation surface. Taking calculation lines of static waves, correlational waves, metric meters, correlation panel waves, sets communication lines, screens, direct lines, center location setting, and line rotation surface, and Earth correlation. All right. So it's coming into its own direct signals in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and position of solar sail. Cross line signals going in the opposite direct signals. Also line communication setting coming in 12 lines, 12 centers, 12 positions, 12 panels, 12 set locations south. Direct calculation line center interference sets up its own mechanism location at 24, 48, 72, 144. Sets communication line centers back to 0. Okay. Sets on platforms and line setting high travel in rotation surface and track location. Okay, done my equation, right? So that's what your Earth has done. And set routers and routers and lines of 3 rotation surface. The power mechanism line screen is always to understand location to its calculation modification. What it does to its own settings, all right? As it understands its own mechanism and its own autopilot, now it understands the ground lines, the atmosphere line screens. So we got 3 waving panels in position of travel lines and a 4-line signal. Communication lines at a 5th line equals lines of each. Calculation lines of 4, line conditions of 3. Sets lines of 7 equals lines of 8 in track location, right? So we cross out 5, 1, 1, and 4, and 3, and 8 in set location. Cross line signals equals lines of correlations of triangulation in position of box, right? Now, balance setting is all understanding correlations and setting into jump scar. Correlate track interference in position locations over line screen. Directs modification lines, 1 default line channel, triangulation line condition settings, Argand line rotations, binary reline calculation setting, equals lines of correlation, question mark communications, and percentage of our screen into Fibonacci screen location. Film strips line and position travel. Graphical calculates screen lines as center communication position of its operation surface and traction. Now there it locates setting. If you look really close, you can see the solar sail above signal right there. Travel point lines of graphs understands 1 position of 3, 4, and 5 platforms. Direct calculation line of the sun and the moon comes line rotation, weighting on a signal, and 1 graph. Sets communication line screen high interference into 3 waving panels, 3 line sonars, line communication setting of pi and generation screen. Directs modification lines of center, communicates lines of surface, in program line rotation as center calculation. Okay. Process communication line setting sets lines of tubing in position of 4 waving panels in 1 signal, 1 rotation, 1 surface and traction. Sets line communication of its platforms and direct line centers in position location to a container and track location. Directs modification lines of cycles and line position locations in recycling, redivision, recalculating, remodifying, high line rotations, high line correlations in position of process, and track locations and settings of yin and yang. That's my equation. So once you understand how an Earth basically does its own line setting of its own system, you have to understand its awareness and consciousness of what it's doing, right, inside of you. It's an emotion flying screen, direct lines in position of Fibonacci, going one way in track location, going the opposite direct signal location to its setting. Process communication lines of center opens all signal lines of communication system and travel, Saturn. Saturn line communication lines of Pluto, Mercury, Neptune, and all position calculation line conditions setting opens all 3 triangulation lines of split lines of anomaly. Correlates the correlation line interference into magnetic force, magnetic fields, and magnetic line interference into EMFs. Calculates line center lines has 0 gravity, sets line split lines anomaly, percentage over 1. Correlates calculation 100% in position lines of setting, 100% line correlation setting, space line, timeline, and modulate. Modulate line rotation lines of center correlations, modulation, correlates the settings of travel pounds and communication settings. All right, so position lines of correlation lines of calculation setting. Compound lines of 1 in position of 2, 3, sets lines of R line, rotation surface, triangulate calculation line setting, clairaudience, sets of theme clairvoyance. 3 correlation lines of tractions and dimension line screen lines of awareness and traction. Directs modification lines of center, sets communication line screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Position of its process, line communication with its Earth, and autopilot and track location to its measure. That's my equation. All right. So I'm just showing you how the Earth is set up in its own setting. Recognizing the platforms and line center and line communication setting puts lines of 144 equals lines of cent lines of 0 and position lines equals lines of 0. Okay. Right. Now the position lines has a 0, 0 track locations, and a 4-line arrow indicates position in the same directions, but crosses line signals in position of process. 1 modification screen line adaptation lines of surface. Okay. Routes the routers, line 0, line rotation, surface and tractions. Directs lines of correlation lines of flywheel and line centers of 8 line rotation. Energize location center. Okay. Now platforms 1 indicates 1 arrow, 1 indicate 1 line screen, 1 atmosphere screen location. Now directs lines of modification down cross line conditions. Process communication line centers sets up the waving cycles. Now we energize the correlation lines of its height calculation screen. As a cerebral cortex, sim modification screen line, modulation line rotation, changes communications. Sets lines of the cortex, set location setting, endorphins, direct lines, hyperdrive, hyper mode, hyperline screen, direct lines into atom line rotation surface, and applications. Direct modification lines are energetic dome screen, calculation lines into levels. Simtex, cortex, length and the codex. Modified line screen and position lines of track interference. Center of brain line center interference location, interceptions, interfacing, interlocking, and division, and rotation surface interactions. This puts a flywheel correlation setting out of motion in position of flux in line conditions of response and track location. All right. Sets lines of communications. What is this in track line communication? The tree of life. Boom. Done by equation. All right. It's all done now. Right. So your Earth is in a router router. Platform's one signal, one rotation surface, but it's a powerful step when you see the tree of life, right? Gardens of Eden, guys. Gardens of Eden. 4 line signals, line condition setting of Lotus. Travel course lines of 1 platform, 2 line centers, and 3 track location of provision. Center core line track line interference of the sun, waits on signal, waits on routers, line-to-line rotations, goes around the modification screen line, adaptation lines of surface, and a clocking center line position location system, and a 24 lines of zeros in line position location in all levels and line condition electrical grids, electrical panels, star portals, star position panel, correlation lines, attractions, and line communication lines, the Borealis Gardens, line rotation surface, and track location of Adam Mini, line rotation setting, in track location line condition setting back to its nothingness and rotation surface. Down by equation. Okay? Gardens of Eden. Okay? It's all done. All right. Platform communication line is really understand how to direct the signals. Now, directing line signal location of its nothingness is all through platitude screen. Getting that direct signal in position lines calculation line is knowing calculation line interference and line center interference. Direct calculation lines, how you reiterate your system in calculation screen lines and direct signals of knowledge. Knowing the communication lines, okay, neutralizes the correlation lines attractions, right? Operation line surface, bandwidths over pi, calculation lines of levels, and existence correlations and division, direct lines at all line communication at ground lines, levels, in position locations to its energy line of screen location of setting and travel, okay, knowledge. Now that process line signals in position of white centers into black surface correlate the track interference in position of center correlation. Direct modification lines 1 center, 1 operation, and 3 triangulate split lines of anomaly that puts position of core settings and track lines of yin and yang and process communication. Direct calculates lines of center lines in the line rotation center, energized rotation surface attractions. Direct modification lines high center interference, scan position of 3 center line conditions of pi and generation of screens. Direct modification lines of 2 panels and track locations. Opens all signals and platforms of 1, 2, and 3 set location of travel. Okay, if you look really close, you can see the intelligence inline position location and setting. Done by equation. Tree of life. All right, tree of life line screen, direct lines of panels, and correlation lines to track interference of Gardens of Eden. Okay, all right. So it's just a closer view of what it is in traction, right? Platform's communication lines with the sun and the moon opens up portals and lines of wormholes that opens all communication setting and travel. Points lines of graph, puts lines of high center interference, configuration line screen high interference of face recognitions of all time sequence of space and time. Done by equation, guys. So understanding the nodes and line centers at high calculation setting in position of plasma. Direct lines of correlation lines across line signals. 1 arrow indicates 1 lines of pi, switching line off, switching line on. Okay, so off in 3 line signals, on in 1 line provision. Sets communication line screens in 1 center, 1 traction, 1 set location. Platform communication lines, screen lines, high center interference in a 45 line wave. Percentage over line equals lines of 100. Percentage over line communication lines of box. And position of flux. Now the flux communication lines of 1 center, 3 locations, and direct lines of 1 cycle and set location. Pattern communication lines of circuitry line screen is the earth line rotation surface. Position its program line centers at 3 waving panel crosses line signal on a back force location. Platitude division lines cross line signals in the line condition setting of stealth mode. Direct lines correspond to line setting calculation. Line signals don't come into the X2000s, platitude line screen high center interference. Waving cycles, center lines of communication of docking. Direct lines are archetypes, one position and two track locations. One going the opposite, one going the opposite way, line rotation surface. Triangulates the platforms and line rotation in 3-line cycles location. Travel point line graphs, center lines communication, one center in positional platforms of A line C of B, C location. Direct modification line cycles, high center interference in position location of Vega and track location. Direct lines of correlation lines, laser directions, 1, 2, cross line, 3, line, 4, line signals, line rotation surface, platitude rotation surface, travels. Direct modification line signals comes in securing lines of measures, 2 track lines settings, 2 line rotations, Vega communication line screen. Calculation line centers of 2, 2, 2, space lines of 2 lines in 3 locations. So you got box line, rotation surface, and 1 triangulation, 1 rotation. Now the data position of this program opens up the Windows cycles and rotation cycles of TV reception screen. Now we direct line signals in the green line cycles, sets communication line, opens up signals, modification centers, and travel correlation lines to Earth perception location. Direct modification lines, green line surface, puts position of our operation line location back to 0. Sets communication lines, screen high interference, sets communication lines of security, routers and routers, and those 3 routers, rotations, ground lines, power generators, and position the atmosphere line, screen location, setting, and travel. That make equation. Okay. So once you understand how this is all done, when it starts off, location setting of Gardens of Eden, everything routes the routers and line conditions your Wi-Fi lines, your satellites, your highways. Omni highways or anything through metric screen line adaptation lines of TV reception screen location settings. Inhibitors lines of security, position lines of Earth line, communicates to the green line center. Let's open all signal locations into brown. 1 indicate, 1 transmission screen, opens all signals. Now I'm just going through overlapping sequence, add position lines of calculations into purple. Setting correlation lines of correlation track interference in positional travels, direct lines modification lines of yellow, and line signals location. Now, in that direction, so we go through waving line cycles. We go through the ground line screens into blue and operation line surface and tractions. Direct modification line screen sets lines of blue, sets lines of cycles, sets lines of communications, and center communication, right? All right, so waving cycles comes in lines of high center infinity 8, rotates the surface, and line rotation centers and traction. Directs modification line, cloud line, screen line, operation surface, and correlation, base recognition. Direct calculation 1 signal, 1 cross line connection, triangulation line, rotation, surface, and tractions. Direct modifications into Merkaba test locations, ground line centers into infinity line rotation surface, and velvet communication. Direct calculation line screens, we go through correlation. Now we go through Plattman screens. We go through 0 correlations, 8 line cycles, 0, 8, 0, 8, 8 line centers in position 8, 8 positions, 8, 8 tractions, 8 line center rotations, 8 lines of past, 8 lines of present, 8 lines of future. Okay, 8 lines of setting, 8 lines of grounds, 8 lines of rotation. Okay, sets communication lines of 2 tracks, line center, split lines anomaly, line rotation surface, 1 line rotation center, correlation lines of center. Position of processes, correlation lines of tractions, opens all signals, open modification to energetic dome screens and set applications. Sets communication lines of platforms, we cross the signals and we cross line divisions, and we set communications setting of travel. Points lines of graphs, and comes in, opens all signals, opens all platform, opens all communications setting, automatic view, and track location. Direct modification line screens, highest interference, XT1000 comes in 1 cycle, 1 waving, 4 line cycles, and 3 line rotation. Direct modification lines, cross line signals, 1 signal, position lines of center core center, sets communication ground lines, highest interference of travels. Points lines of graph communication, opens up the Earth line rotation surface, and 0 gravity, and set location of center operation. Formation locations of setting, all done through equation, right? The tree of life. Sets communication line screens, guys. There it is in line communication setting, future adaptation line rotation. Okay? And again, this is up closer, right? So I'm working on 3 provision lines of waves, correlation lines of frames, and track locations. Starting at track lines, coming in this line communication. Setting communication line screen is understanding how to set the correlation lines of Boreas Gardens, communication lines of high center interference, how you guys will coordinate in position lines of Babylon, changing all communication on the Earth line rotation surface. Now that's history, ancestry, and all of us a celestial that puts everything in line connection setting, deleting all formation lines of grounds. That closes its communication, that cancels and deletes everything in default channels back in 0 gravity and line setting high interference into 800,000 lines of zeros and line position of 1 program in position of track lines into zero gravity, zero motion, and flux locations, and set calculation line centers at line rotation surface into application of spectrum and coloration of the light and automatic view in line rotation surface and your Earth locations brings it into lines of calculation setting of its nothingness, awareness of its consciousness of self-identity and self-motivation setting and all levels of its atmosphere line screen interference into its power generation screen lines and its Earth line rotations of Mother Earth and track locations. Done by equation. All right, so the center communication setting is ready to understand how to operate the cycles. Getting in that communication is understanding the program, how to set the communication to its tone. Direct lines of modification opens all cycles in high correlation setting and spectrum correlation lines attractions. Now, direct lines of signals and showing lines of wavings that puts all levels of correlation setting and track interference to trial point graphs. Now, directing line signals is understanding how to motivate signals and position location to a system, all through calculation line screens and direction, right? Now, I'm going through back waving channels, back in time and triangle. Triangulation line screens and adaptation lines center interference platforms communication line screens, adaptation lines of surface. Puts everything back in platitude screen location settings and travel mechanisms. Points lines of graph. Now we go through bracket communication lines of hangers. Position of bracket 1, 0 equals lines of Earth. Okay, equals lines of autotones. Then we go with the H line rotation and calculations. Now we wave one center, cross line signals, set position of 0, XC1000s on 2 platforms, 3 centers, and 4 track location. Now direct lines of light signals, we cross the line screen. We allocate one screen line setting and we split the lines anomaly and graph calculations and setting. Okay, so we go through line screens and we be careful because there's a line center interference that opens all signals and modification lines of zero gravity and bracket interference. Position of process is the center core, opens all levels of magnetic line screen high interference in its capsule correlation lines attractions and center communication setting of its atmosphere lines and its data. The process communication lines crosses line screen and position location to its system. This is where it comes into the clustering and correlation lines attractions. Direct modification lines has correlation line settings that opens all signals in modification system. Now we come into line communication setting to the ocular screen location setting. Direct modification lines, one signal, one graph, one rotation, one center, one correlation calculation lines of home. Direct modification line cycles, one platform in the opposite directions, center core system in calculation, one center operation surface in an atom rotation center and correlation lines attractions. Direct modification lines of cycles. Done by equation. All right. Complicated stuff. All right. So the mechanism lines of force, the frame communication lines of Earth has to recognize the bracket and its hangers. Indirect signals modificates the system. So we're going to work with the 27 line screen and equals lines of 2 equals line screen and position weight to 40. Done. 40 settings equals lines of 1 equals lines of 0 sets lines of 1 traction. Okay. Now the 1 traction split line slides cross location. So it's like, right? Crossing lines, alpha line, change communications, direct signals, and communication of voice lines and patterns. 45-degree angle, split lines, correlation lines. See that divot there? See that divot? All right. So that's a transit over line screen. Okay. We overcross the signals and platforms of communication lines of 3 tractions and setting. Puts all levels of formation screen lines and adaptation lines of surface. The process communication line signals has 1, 2, and 3 track location, right? Down signals, cross location. Platform communication lines, cross line signals in position line centers into 4 settings, 0 core line setting. Position of platforms in 4 set locations. Direct lines of 0 lines and equal line in position upline swing location. Cross line signals in line centers of 7 location and calculation lines of 2 in line rotation surface. Okay, very complicated stuff. Direct lines of correlation is the magnetic highway line screen. Sets location again through the capsules. Indirect line signals in modification system and trial correlation. Position of process comes in downshift line condition to its clustrum. In line calculation setting is tree formation of light force and line direct signals to crop circle location. Done by equation, right? So I set up trees of light in each line communication at 24 cycle. That puts platforms line center higher interference 144 line measure. Sets communication lines as center correlation lines of 0 gravity. That makes equation, right? All right, so the platform's correlation lines of E sets lines of 1. E equals lines, okay, waving line rotation, correlation lines, Fibonacci line screen location. So the E line centers the two platforms correlation. That's what you guys have to get used to now. How to go from E line to a platform. Center correlation lines of 0 sets communication. Let's go through tractions. 1 indicates one platform, 1 indicates one arrow, 1 indicates one platform, 1 indicates 1 0, 1 indicates one setting, 1 indicates one surface and traction. Now, directing lines of pi sets lines of communications, process calculations. All right, so just going very fast here. We're going to go through process communication screens, process calculation screen line, adaptation lines of surface, and cross line signals. Process communication, one indicator, crosses over line setting and positioners calculations, point lines of graph, and one rotation, right? Now, directing lines of platforms come in the center line of communication to center of operation. Position lines of tractions sets lines of center in position operation. Scan lines, screen lines into one surface and 3 settings, right? Process communication lines of platforms comes out line division in a 3-line cycle. Sets lines of platforms into 1, 2, 3 in-line rotations to a beacon light and rotation center of traction. Directs modification lines bringing the X2001 cycle. Sets cross line centers of 2 cycle, 3-line rotation surface and traction. Directs modification lines of cycles, 1-line indicator, program line, rotation surface, and track location. Okay? Very complicated stuff, guys. Very complicated stuff, right? So the Earth itself is coming back to its schematics of itself. It's starting to understand its levels and how to go through its binaries, its transistors, its resistors, its memory, its no memory, all at once. Massive nothing, massive equation, right? But you understand the schematics, how this is already done, right? But I'm just showing you how the Earth goes on its own automatic view and what it's doing through line setting of its own track location, how it's coming into its own mechanism in position of settings, puts everything in modification system to its remote, in line setting to its VR system and set location. Very powerful stuff. All through an E-line centers and 3 wave and line patterns, and line condition setting equals lines of 6. Sets position lines of highest interference, sim modification, avatar line screen, and higher self correlation. Higher self, avatar sim. Okay? So I'm just showing you how the Earth itself sets up lines of communication with schematics. It's no difference that you guys go through upgrades, uploads and downloads, and upgradings and your downgrading settings. So it's in position of process, guys, but it's very powerful what the Earth is doing through its own system, coming back to its own setting, of its own set location, of its computer operating system. Okay. All right, so there's so many ways to do formulas, equations, guys. That's why I give you test review and evaluations, right? Every Friday now, because the team is coming more of modifications, how to understand the mind of itself, not the mind of you, the mind of itself, which is extremely powerful because it understands its own system, of its own space, of its own time, of its own modification. Getting position lines of theta, process lines equals lines of 0. Set lines equals lines of 0 and a 3-track location, right? Now the top of the line screen sets lines of communication, splits lines of highest interference, sets communication grounds, powers, and you're always working with the atmosphere line screen. That directs signals in position location to its calculation line system in position lines of intelligence. See, intelligence. Everything's information intelligence. So it's creating lines of anomaly and turning it into an image line screen interference and habitation or line communication setting to its position of its inner child that processes the calculations of schematics, putting lines of factors over pi in track location system and traffic correlation. Directs modification lines, set lines high interference, sonar line rotation surface, and directions of face recognition. Okay? Powerful, isn't it? Understanding direction is understanding formulas, equations of its Earth. Right? This is all done what your Earth is doing itself. The Earth itself is doing itself through schematics. So once you understand that, then you understand the grounds, the powers, the atmosphere. Then you understand the Earth, the air, the water, and the fire, and your heart, and what it's doing through its flux. See the flux? See my hand? There's the flux, right? Light, shades, and shadows is everything in correlation lines of attractions, guys. Light is its own settings. Everything you see around you is its own system of operation. Now, the more you identify that, the more it gets easier in attractions, all through schematics over line conditions, your Earth perception. Okay? But this is not perception now, is it? It's remote. Right? Perception is reaction. Remote is real time in position in your settings. Okay? So there's no levels or reactions of anything, is there? Because you're going too fast in the mind. The mind can't stop. It's like you're going 50,000 miles an hour and then you put on the brakes. Even you have your seatbelt, you're going to, right? So you want to keep doing that, every second, every minute, every hour, right? So no, you don't want to do that. You don't want to feel like a milkshake. This is what is in traction set locations, guys. Okay, you want to feel like a milkshake, right? Trying to stay in the center of your earth, trying to stand the powers of you in the center locations of yin and yang, and try to stand your magnetic highways of information cycles that correlates the system and travel correlate lines of you and center operation. That's all this is, nothing else. Grounding your settings to your earth and rotation lines of surface and set locations. Understanding you, power of the yin and yang. That doesn't leave the center of correlation. The only thing that leaves is the mindset location. All right? So it's very powerful when you come into that line communication of this program. All right? To understand what you can do from inside in calculation. Okay? Then you understand your tubings. Then you understand your correlation settings of your earth and your space. Okay? And set location of your grounds. And your set location of your atmospheres. Okay? And your clockings. Okay? 24, 48, 72, 144. Center core settings and travel. Your crop circle. Now you look at formation line condition setting. What do you have? Calculate modify intelligence. Hoo-ah. Right? Like I said, there's so many ways of looking at things, but you have to understand you in all ways and forms. To recognize you is to identify you and everything around you. It doesn't need to identify you. You have to identify everything around now and realize that you have a body of its own mechanism that understands its own system and understands its own shape and understands its cells. Once you understand that, building a friendship and a relationship and a partnership with yourself first is recognizing the body is just a vessel, guys. And once you understand that, it becomes and then it becomes you, and then becomes your, and then it becomes aware of consciousness, and then it becomes self-identity of who you are. Okay, who you are. Through the mind, through the heart, through the soul, and through the body. Okay? All right, so getting into that settings, we have to really understand how to mechanism lines of force. And we go back in correlation lines of attractions. Now, direct line settings, we set up some security lines of panels. Panels is 2, 2, and 2 line settings of 3 attractions, right? Direct lines of triangulation, inline rotation surface. Okay? Sets lines of communication, ground lines, operation lines, set location of timestamp. See the bottom line rotation surface attractions? All right. Direct modification line is a classic correlation lines of a string. Indicates lines of green arrows and track location. Symbolism line screen and high interference sets lines of communication line system and travel point lines of graph correlation. Sets communication lines, triangulate line connection settings. Now you understand how to use molecules and structure. How everything works in set locations. Setting the E-line rotation is position lines. Now we go through infinity lines, 3 weather patterns, 1 signal, 2 signal, and 3 set location. Now, direct lines of correlation lines of blue. Now, blue lines correlate the communications into all lines. The capacity line screen and high center interference. Then we go in position lines of red because it overlines the signals and travels, and point lines of default and correlation lines of traction. See that how it moved by itself? Okay, let's put it back in position here. Okay. All right. So then we go through line communication, which is the invisible. Because remember, it's the VR setting and correlations. Then we cross the signals. Then we cross out the E, cross out the S, cross out the atmospheres, the 2-1 track lines and till lulls. We also cross the X2000, run rotor line rotations and cross line signals. We also cross the timestamps of 2-2 track location, cross line signals, open all signals, open all modification lines, and zero gravity correlation. Okay, face recognition. See? Face recognition. See it? There's the face, right? Okay. You see it, right? See the face. It's all done now, right? But you have to cross these things out, and that's cancel, right? Especially when you go through the waving central systems of electrical line screens. Sets communication to its position. Archetypes, correlation lines, high center interference, X2000 point lines, graph communication, cross lines indicate line center interference, cross signals and set location, right? Mechanism over pi is a coloration path. Now you can set lines of communication a four-way and screen line. You can color it in, but you have to be very careful how you communicate to a setting because it changes all levels of its set location and detection. Interact location to its measure that scales its balance on its flywheel and track location. Okay, so let's go through line screen and high center interference. Now it can change coloration, but again, you got to be careful. You don't want to override signals in line communication lines as speed lines of anomaler because it changes the hyperdrive, hyper mode, hyper accelerated line condition to your particle chambers, line condition setting to your setting location system, all through traction locations. Okay. All right. So it's a lot of fun when you really just basically have fun with it. You know, you just really start to understand, and then you can add blue. All right. This indicates your position locations and what you can do through coloration. All right. So many formation line screens in the VR settings, guys. But getting balanced with this gets you in all levels of correlation, setting, and traction. Okay. Okay, so we got three indicate line screens. Purple line screen, we got a blue line, we got a red line screen locations, right? Inhibitors are a line, let's go through black surface, one center core system of a black hole that opens the signals into a solar disk, CD-ROM, and track location setting. Okay, now that's plasma line screen. So we go through offline signal and set location. All right, see, it's traveling too fast, see? All right, so it's crossing through line screens, right? Now we go through the adaptation line surface and track location of one center communications, opens all tractions, where you can change the frame and track line connection to its frequency set location. Okay, so it's really understanding how to service line screens and set position travels. Okay, so directing lines of levels puts lines of graph calculation lines and how you come into your highways now. Let's set position of travel line point graphs. Okay, set position of 1, 2, and 3, right? So we got the green line center, we got the yellow correlation, and we got the red line calculation, right? That's your traffic light. The center core system is you, ground center is the Earth, and your position, your atmosphere starts here in track location modification, right? Now, getting direct line signal is understanding the center of you. Your data highways processes communication lines of its windows, frame communication lines of its program, okay? Directing lines of its platforms and know exactly where you're going in position location to its indication, right? You can add platforms and add line signals, add communication surface and track location, right? So it's really understanding how to go through your data high screens now because it's putting you into more lines of two receptions. Let's go through frame line screens, one setting location, right? Sets communication lines of one data, one process line setting, platform 1, 2, and 3 tractions, right? Why do I do everything in a 45, right? Because it's not going back, it's going forward, right? So when you go into the I-line cycle, it's the center operation of you. So you could keep going faster, but you keep going further, which means you're always in the center of operation. You stay still, but everything else in the mind does everything else, which is already done. The process communication lines is center, sets position to its location system, all kept modified in track location. Direct lines of highest interference, waving cycles in one center, in position of 2 set location, right? Process communication lines, you're always working with your Earth. This is always your Earth, okay? But you're above the center correlation calculation line, the 3 waving pattern that puts all levels of you in track location, okay, in direction. The center position line size interference is all levels in how you go through your data, ports, and communications and setting, right? Bring in the XC1000s. Once they see the platforms, they come in locations and they land. If they dock their system and travel. Okay, now when they dock, they have a center core system that opens all tractions in your line communication setting. Okay, the operation platforms comes in line connection setting to a triangulation line. So that's communications across line signals and line connection setting in its operation surface and a 3 triangulation line connection setting at the position of its program. Direct calculation line screens, high center interference. So we have point lines of intelligence and 3 lines and 3 locations in a 2 track location provision, right? So it's really interesting how this is all set up on standby. Everything's on standby until you come into position travels. Ground line centers, position of process, communication of powers, and line condition magnetic highway and line rotation surface and traction. It's all done through equation, guys. You just have to understand how this all works when you get into more levels of your highway, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Understand your Earth, understand the powers, understand the atmosphere line, right? Getting into that process gets you a better understanding how to navigate your system and positional platforms, okay? So I'm showing you so many ways how you can set up your line communication setting to its position, all through calculations, right? How you see yourself in position lines when you start with calculations of the Gardens of Eden. Okay? Gardens of Eden, people. Look at how powerful that is. It's alive. You know, it's a mechanism of force. It's showing you. It's showing you. Now, if you keep looking at it, you're going to see a dome. That dome is going to show you exactly what it is and what it can do next in its frame, right? Amazing when you really get into all set locations. And then you start to see the modification screen line, adaptation lines of surface. Now, if you look really, really close, I'm going through waving central calculations, say the Jelix, then you're going to start to see everything through a set location of its angels, archangels, and its meta archangel screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. There it is. Okay. Correlate calculation lines, set of position travel lines. Phoenix, Phoenix. Set lines of direct location lines of the Sphinx. Correlate the track interference into position travels, angelic communication lines of angels and track location. Face recognitions of 2-point lines of track location of face recognition. Okay. See the faces on both side location. All right. Recognizing you through face recognition is everything through platforms and communications, guys. But understanding how to go through your highways is extremely important because you're in position lines of highest center interference. Crossing line signals, right? Whenever you have to cancel things out going this way and going this way now, right? So platforms of 24 sets position of its locations, right? Then you cross over, but you have to cancel out, okay? Because if you don't cancel out, it's going to create its own setting, right? So that's why you have to cancel out, because you're in charge. Because if you're not in charge, the galaxy is going to shift its winds and align set location and do its own system and set location. All right. So it's very important how you have to control the grounds, which is a magnetic line screen. There's no difference doing telepathy, controlling your settings, location, your system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 platform communications, right? Sets lines of 1, 2, 3 track location of platforms lines. So correlation lines of A, track location lines of B, balance position lines of C, and D line center location of DX. Sets lines of correlation lines of 1 setting, 1 rotation, 1 surface, 1 traction, and 1 provision. Okay, all through calculations. Cross line screens, data formation lines into a triangulation or line communication to a box and the TV reception. See the TV reception? All right. Sets communication lines of waves. All right, here they are. Snowy graph interference, lacing line communication. All right, inside a set location of TV, right? So when your TV goes off, it goes on its own system of clouds. It goes on its own system of platforms. It goes on its own system of binaries. It does everything in its location of its own solar cell, okay? See, you're not aware of these things. You're not aware of what your computer and your phone and your digital pad can do. All you see is programs, but what you don't understand, it's an identity of what it's only doing and its own force of recognition. So it's amazing where it can come into coloration lines of black and white, snowy graph interference, and a two-waving panel in line position to its location to its calculation. All right. Or it can go through a center core system into an energetic line screen location setting of an XD1000. Right. So it's how we are all connected to everything and how everything's all connected to you through magnetics. Positions of platforms is understanding how to go core settings of center. Everything has a ground, everything has a power, everything has a center, right? And track location, all right? Now, if you look really close, you can see the face recognition of its TV reception. Everything has a face. And once you identify that, then you build a partnership and a friendship with its system. Because now you don't have to be convinced, because everything around you is exactly what it is. It just is. Because it knows its identity, it knows its purpose, and it knows the existence, all from the TV reception of face recognition and configuration. Okay? Wow, eh? It's like, whoa, where's all this coming from? Trying to understand how to formulate this and how to really get in your position locations. So we're coming into line setting high interference. The test is based on everything that you go through encryptions in three settings, and three settings. Okay. Okay. So 3 equals lines of grounds, 3 equals lines of grounds, 3 equals lines of grounds. Right. So ground level, ground power, program, and ground space. Okay. Sets communication line high interference location of equals lines of 0, equals lines of 0, equals lines of 0. Correlates to communication setting and travel, right? Okay, so we split lines anomaly, travel lines of 1, and cross lines of 2 track location. Calculation lines of 3 equals lines highest interference in the same location setting. Process communication line interference, ground lines, 1 signal, 1 operation, 1 arrow indicating, 1 going up and 1 going down in track location. Direct modification lines, center core system and travel in position location of router into energetic domes and line condition setting to a location grid in calculation. All right, so secure lines of measure, cross line signal. Okay. All right, so we have the center core system, ground line center, process lines of 0, 0, 0, because that's where you guys are. 4 settings of 1, 2, 3, and 4 set locations. All right, so the center core system is settings location 1, 2, 3, and 4 set locations one way, and position lines of 1, 2, 3, 4 set locations the other way. Track communication of the lines of center and position locations in setting, center communication ground lines, operation surface, and track location. Complicated stuff, isn't it? Trying to figure out what's going on, right? All through mechanisms, all through structure, all through design, all through schematics, all through its earth. This is all done through your earth at your different levels. So bringing back its sequence is bringing back its nothingness of its awareness, of consciousness of what it is through autopilot. Autopilot in all lines of synchronous correlation setting track lines. The synchronicity in position to its location is all levels of track locations. Now, direct line modification line high interference. The correlation lines of the team line is track locations. Their direct line signals is 0, 0, 0. Position of 4 settings in position of 4 lines, calculation on the left, and space lines of time. Size communication lines, space lines, communications. Upline signals, cross line screen into energetic dome line rotation surface, inline settings in all line wave and cycles in communication system. Tunnels communication line screen, high interference, high position program location setting, and portals calculation. Okay? Complicated, isn't it? Trying to understand what's going on, right? So it's a mechanism of force. It's understanding why you have force and energy fields and to all calculated modified. Trying to understand you through the energy cycles, energy surface, energy rotations, energy correlations, energy directions, energy calculations to its surface line conditions. Understanding yourself through your 5th elements. How to use your earth, air, water, fire, and your position of your set location, which is your heart. Your heart is the center core of everything, right? All right. So when I say center, it position, even though it's no coincidence that the heart's on the left and not on the right. We've been through that before. There's a reason why. The creator comes in line screen. Directing lines calculates line center interference. You know what it is in track location provision elements calculation settings? Why is it positioned? Let's get in body formation. That's track location line calculation setting, right? Okay, so that's you in traction, right? All right. Set correlation lines on the left. So arts here, like in high set interference. What's positioning the earth line rotations, right? This is space, this is earth, right? Okay, so what's the ground line? Split lines anomaly. Correlate track center interference, congratulations, flux capacitor. Okay, so spinning line correlation, space. Correlation lines, earth. Okay, earth line, space line, track location. Okay, says communication on grounds, earth. There's your earth, rotation surface, right? Now you got your clocking system, setting correlation lines of panels, earth line rotations, clock wheel correlation lines, flywheel track locations, and crop circle. Hoo-ah. Do you lead in the center? No. Right? So now you understand why your heart is on the left and not the right. So heart's on the left, which is space. Earth, space, flux capacitor. Flux capacitor, browse adapters, provision lines of cycles, templates, 4 track location provisions, I-line cycles, I-line system, Eye-line surface, eye-line rotation. Understanding correlations, attractions, understand your clockings. Mechanism lines of grounds, 24. Everything has a 24. Everything has a 48. Everything has a 72. And everything has a 144. Ground has that, 24, 48, 72, 144. So does the powers. So does the atmospheres, right? It's a stepping stone position locations. What do you think heaven on earth is, guys? Crossing that line sendings to the steps, locations, centers of travels, right? It's that correlation line track interference that puts you in all position locations to its ladder, that puts you in a high correlation line connected setting to magnetic highway information system, a correlation line connected setting to the VR system track location. Okay? Stepping procedures, guys. And set locations, right? Now, because you guys are crossing over, the platforms are going to get more complicated now because you're going to higher line communication of the mind itself through its awareness of consciousness and set locations, all right? Directing the lines of modifications, interactions, right? That's it. See you in 5.